allow me once again, this is our last lecture, and I'm so happy that we have moved this long journey together in this course called the Institutional Framework. My name once again is Rogers Mutevere from the Faculty of Agriculture, Environmental Sciences in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics at Mount Elizabeth University. We have looked at so many cross-cutting issues. So far, we have looked at the invasive species, which we said these are not native within our ecosystems. But we also looked at the biotechnology, which we call the genetic engineered organisms, or genetically modified organisms. Now, in the last lecture, before we ended, we started with the definition of gender. And where we already gave a definition that gender is the social construction, the role attached to male and female beings. So it is quite different from the sex, what we call sex. Now, the limitations there are limitations faced by women in promoting agroecology. Women, of course, we know they are the ones who are left to do most of the farm work, especially small farm work, and they face challenges. They are not promoted. Their work doesn't come. They are only limited to a few activities. For example, here we're saying that women have only limited access to land rights. They don't own land. Therefore, even if they wanted to increase the scale of production, it's going to be very difficult for them because they don't own this land. This land is for the man. Another limitation that women face when they want to participate in agroecology is that their work is not valued enough. And they also have what we call a double work burden. They do production on the farm, but they also do reproduction. They are our mothers, they produce, they're always pregnant. At the same time, they have to do a lot of work in the farm, so they are not very good. They face that challenge in promoting agroecology. And also another element we have, which is so bad, is the violence against women, which is very common in societies which are mainly managed by men, the patriarchal social systems. And there's also limited access to human capital due to gender inequality, credit issues. They cannot access bank loans because, after all, they don't own this land. They don't have land titles. And they also have limited access to cash and credit. And women have limited access to inputs, the information and technologies. They don't have time to listen to radios. They're always busy cooking. But fortunately, we see that agroecology gives the opportunity to overcome some of those challenges. How then does agroecology promote women? First of all, that the agroecology, in agroecology there's an element of biodiversity and traditional knowledge, and this encourages the use of home-sourced seeds. All of you know, and you'll agree with me, that women are very good at keeping seeds. Beans in the small pot, somewhere in a calabash, they are keeping these seeds. And since agroecology uses what we call home-kept seeds, then women find they can easily be integrated within agroecology because of the indigenous knowledge and practices like using previously kept seeds. It also supports the improved health. Agroecology supports improved health, of course, through proper nutrition and eating healthy products. So women are now covered here. Yes, women are covered because they are going to eat healthy food. So how agroecology also promotes the opportunities for women? It offers economic opportunities for women because it's associated with low startup capital. Agroecology and conventional farming, which is mostly large scale, requires that you start small. And starting small is a characteristic of most women in business. So agroecology promotes them by allowing them to start small. And also agroecology is associated with learning, with sharing, with social cohesion. We saw a lot of what we call social inclusion. Children, women, disabled, and elderly, even the elderly, are all participating in agroecology. So it gives them that chance, even to learn, even to share, and even they become one. And lastly, we see that it creates meaningful work that involves the vast of tasks. So because agroecology has the element of diversity, there are many sections, there are many enterprises. So in these many enterprises, there is no way women can fail to get what to do. So it offers them more tasks to do, which requires more specialized skills, and like in conventional practices, where you only have a few practices, you're only producing, harvesting, and selling. Maybe there is no recycling. So women may not find the opportunity in such a kind of practice, but agroecology gives them all that opportunity. Then, having looked at the role of gender in agroecology, another cross-cutting issue I'm going to look at here is the indigenous knowledge. I already mentioned that a lot of indigenous knowledge is there housed by the local communities. People have a way of telling the time, the seasons, looking at the birds. When there is a certain bird which comes, what we call a hisamtud, and then once they hear the sound, they know that it is going to rain. And people already know. You know, for those of you who come from maybe areas like Mwenge, we have a certain bird which we call Ortambaisiga. Ortambaisiga is a bird which only comes only once, and once people do it, it's already a sign that the planting season has come. So people start planting their seeds, preparing their seeds, preparing their gardens, removing grasses, and even eventually they start sowing the millet. So that's the Ortambaisiga concept. But of course, because of climate change and loss of biodiversity, we are losing out on such things. Now also, we had other issues. We knew in the past, using indigenous knowledge, that once wind starts blowing from that direction, or the east going to the west, we start seeing certain insects like the butterflies. Then we know that the season, the dry season, is starting. You remember the Kadoima season. Once we start seeing those butterflies, then people will already predict that the Kadoima is going to attack crops, and then they put measures of controlling it. Previously, there were also locusts and ziggy. Once they started coming, people had to generate knowledge of managing their crops to make sure they are protected. They are protected from these pests. All this is the concept of the indigenous knowledge that we needed to integrate within the society. But now, by giving up on such knowledge, it seems we are giving up on our history, and therefore it's going to be difficult for us to be able to produce. Now, what does it mean? How can we integrate indigenous knowledge within the local systems? Agroecology gives us that opportunity, unlike conventional practice. Can we start looking at the seasons? We say, okay, if now we see a black cloud somewhere and having some things rotating, then there's going to be a storm. Maybe someone can run already and start supporting their banana plants, because they know a very stormy, bad rain is coming by looking at the cloud, the type of cloud. So unless we develop this knowledge and integrate it within our local science, then it means we are losing out on key aspects. So indigenous knowledge was able to do that. But of course also the indigenous knowledge comes in with the role of cultural and traditional institutions. The cultural institutions like the kingdom had a concept of what we call the granary, Yanguli. Now this concept was very, very key in ensuring food security for the local people. Everyone was supposed to harvest and contribute a given amount of food, like millet, in that granary, local granary, to make sure, because we know that harvesting will have excess, but later on during the planting season we have the shortage, the scarcity. So the concept of this cultural traditional institution in imparting this knowledge to the local community through their chiefs was really key in ensuring the food security. And agroecology is one key concept that will be brought in, because agroecology uses locally sourced seeds from the previous harvest. So people had a way of being encouraged to keep this seed within the community granaries, and even actually every home had a granary. If I may ask, how many of you still know or have this granary in their home? Because by mere seeing the structure there, people would be happy, they think food is there. Actually, when even the Food got finished long time ago, but the structure of a granary in their home was already giving the assurance to the children that they will have to eat. And actually, when we talk about food security, we're not only talking about the physical food, but even the mere presence of a banana plantation is already giving the security to the children that you know the story of the woman who cooked stones for the children. Children kept seeing the stones boiling and it is covered, you can't know what is there. Then eventually wait and then fall asleep. The old woman removes the stones and pours it, waits for another day. That day is done. So the food security concept was in the traditional society looked at that. We didn't really always have to eat, but looking at the availability of food, having a garden near the home, having a granary, which were always promoted within our cultural or traditional institutions was key. But for you today, every day you are thinking about food, you are thinking of running to come late. If you have not yet come, you have come late, children are already crying because they don't see anything. So even if you eventually bring the food, you have already made these children feel vulnerable. Emotionally, you have already affected them. So, in short, the cross-cutting issues we have looked at the invasive species. We say these are the alien or non-native species, the weeds which come into an ecosystem that did not originally exist there. We looked at the biotechnology in agroecology, where mainly we say that it compromises our agroecology through genetic engineering, where we are changing the genes of different crops and animals to be able to make them either grow big inside, become more sweet, become what, but we are taking them away from the traditional concept, and therefore the recycling aspect is dying off with biotechnology. Then we talked about maybe the element which are not covered here is the artificial intelligence concept, which is compromising with the labor involvement and social inclusion within our agroecology. We looked at gender. One key concept we differentiated was the difference between gender and sex. Please note that one, that gender is just a social construction of the roles attached to male and female, while sex is just a biological definition of male and female. Then we also looked at the indigenous knowledge, where we talked about examples of the birds which were telling us about seasons. Also, we looked at maybe the winds telling us about the time. We talked about the key bird which was informing us about the planting season, which I call the Otamba Isega, which is locally known that, but I don't know that. It is disappearing. We had other birds like Kisamutut, which was always shouting and then informing us about the season of rain, and all this would prepare us. All this was indigenous knowledge. I also talked about the lab plant, the legume plant, which was always telling us that native dancers did not come here when actually it's a nitrogen fixer. And of course, the concept of the rainmakers, which are also very key. And all these are issues that we really need to explore more. And also the role of cultural institutions, the kingdoms, and what role they will do in ensuring the food security within the population. So as I conclude in this course, this is the very, very last topic. So we saw a lot of work on the institutional framework, and we examined the approaches of promoting agroecology as a science, as a practice, and as a movement. So if they ask you to define agroecology in form of a practice, in form of a science, in form of a movement, the movement is to do with the social aspects and the promotion. Then we saw several barriers for agroecology, including knowledge and management intensive. Being knowledge and management intensive, the presence of policies for market. Then we saw policies for market regulation and how to promote the marketing of agroecology. Therefore, we say that we need a very strong institutional framework in the form of public, private, civic partnerships. Public, we saw government; private, we saw NGOs, and the cooperative societies, and then the civic, we saw NGOs. So we need to bring all these ones. And these ones will be very key in playing a role for the spearheading of agroecology, which really needs a paradigm shift. We need to shift from the conventional practices, conventional agriculture, to be able to move to agroecology. But this one is not a one-day thing. A lot of research, a lot of changes in the practice need to be taken to be able to promote agroecology. So agroecology is not just a simple thing like most of us understand, but it involves a lot of frameworks. Very many institutions must come, and that's what this course has been taking us through, to make sure which institutions are key. We saw the decentralized and others. So they must come, and then the policies to be able to, must come together to be able to promote agroecology. Thank you so much. We shall meet, of course, in the exam, the upcoming exams. We shall have to send you some revision questions, but prepare adequately. This is not going to come from heaven, it's what we have already covered. So please be always contact me in case you have some areas that you don't understand in the main modules. You can send me an email, you can send me a phone message or WhatsApp message. I'll always be able to reply and give you the feedback on what you ask. Thank you so much. For this assignment, you'll find it on audio, you'll be able to do it and then submit it as the dates are given. Thank you so much.